Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Matt Presti. I'd just like to real quick give an acknowledgement and a shout out to the crew, to Courtenay, to Huston, to all you speakers. Thank you so much for all your hard work and helping put this event on. I'm going to briefly try to get this all through in 33 slides. And I picked that number because I'm not a Mason. I mean that, actually. Double digits, sacred numbers. I do love numerology. A little bit about myself. I'm a self-taught musician, written over 400 songs, self-taught poet. I'm a person who loves vocation. I didn't go to college, but I ended up as a president of a university. Go figure, right? When you have something that you love to read about, love to learn, it really can take off because it's your choice to learn it. The University of Science and Philosophy was a 7-year endeavor, and I learned quite a lot about business, quite a lot about consciousness, and some of the talks we've had, you may hear echoes of similarity in that. Let's go ahead and move into the first slide. I run a podcast too called The Exploration of Consciousness, and I decided to start this podcast back in 2010, and I've done several different series. One in particular, which I'll just throw out there, is Knowing the Creator 101, which is a very interesting correlation of knowledge about God that we're probably not familiar with, but it all ties into consciousness as well. Well, how does consciousness relate to freedom? That's what I particularly want to talk about today. We all know what tyranny is. In fact, tyranny has been the rule of the ages. As Nietzsche said too, so is madness. What does the psychological angle have to do with tyranny? And why does it seem like most people on this planet are terrified of freedom, actual true freedom? How come the human race has been enslaved over and over and over? And every race has enslaved every other race repetitively in cycles going back thousands of years. How does this happen? That's part of what spurred me into the research. I wanted to know the cause. I'm not the kind of person who is ever satisfied with the effects, with the explanations. I want to know what the cause is of things. And so, I also looked into government. The only non-essential business is government. Bureaucracy to me is mediocrity, and this is exactly why it self-destructs after gaining the reins of power. Power is best left to individuals. It's only when you collectivize it that it becomes destructive in its ends. This explains why 29 civilizations have come and gone, in my mind, because we don't really understand what power truly is. And when the bureaucrats or the mediocre get control of everything, it goes to hell. Isn't that interesting? So the base man, he desires a return to the tribe, the collective, the womb metaphor. Different psychologists have called it. It's the instinctual, the animal, thus inversion as a standard, which we also call Satanism, the inversion of reality. And to quote my dad, who passed some 30 years ago, the only purpose of government, he told me, should be to maintain roads and bridges. So in times like these, the common defense against tyranny is for individuals to form loose alliances to secure their rights and interests and to protect their lives and families from an overreaching entity void of checks and balances. These kinds of events are those loose alliances, bringing people together from all different walks, all different modalities, different fields of research and expertise. There's a lot of different presenters here who have done hard work on their own to bring their knowledge to fruition, to share it with the world. And Always remember we stand on the shoulders of giants. But what is the purpose of standing on the shoulders of giants? Is it to worship the giants or to become a giant yourself? So really it comes down to your own desire. And man can set his knob of desire to a very small level, or he can turn it up and maximize his efficiency. I just want to say, too, that nature always balances, and man would do well to learn this most important lesson. That's why nature doesn't collapse, because it has balance. Man's civilizations collapse because they eventually become like a wheel that's not mounted correctly on a hub. It spins out of control, and you end up in a bad situation. So I just want to play something from a clip from the Here for the Truth podcast, C.A.U.S.E and Joel Rafiti. I've been fortunate enough to join them on a podcast, and great guys. And then the man needs no introduction, Michael Tsarion of Unslaved.com, who's done a tremendous amount of work in the fields of psychology. And he'll often say, why do the people that try to analyze the trouble we're in leave psychology at the door? Why is it always something other than the mind that we should be looking at that causes the trouble we're in? So again, that's part of my focus here. But he's going to talk about the shadow, which from this perspective isn't often thought about. But as an archetype, we don't need demons and angels anymore. We have Jung, we have Freud. We can look at these things archetypally. Let's deal with the real world so we can actually solve these problems. Here you go.
What we call the shadow, that's singular. It's not really the best term, because the shadow is really a realm in which all the parts of us that society frowns upon, and then we learn by our superego, which embodies these standards, we don't like about ourselves. So the shadow realm is where all of these legitimate parts of ourselves are cast. You wouldn't have a shadow archetype without the group. When we were absorbed in the plasma of the group as ancestral man, in the early stages, and there was no individuality, because there's no individual consciousness at all. The archetype is in domination, the collective factors dominate, so what we know as individuality doesn't even exist. Now that was the way it was for literally millennia. We as individuals is a tiny blip in history, but during the time when you were absorbed in the crowd decided what traits that you had were taboo. And it remained that way even after the advent of ego individualism, right up to today, and still it happens. The crowd determines, starting with mom and dad, what parts of yourself you must banish. So anytime you talk about a shadow, you're talking about a crowd. They go together, they can't exist apart. No crowd, no shadow. So shadow work is getting the fuck away from the crowd. Does that look like what's happening today? No, the crowd is more powerful now than it ever was before, which means that the individual member of the crowd is going to be more impoverished, because that crowd, whether you like it or not, is going to determine what is correct behavior.
And so the crowd, is everybody familiar with the crowd? You see the crowd in 2020? You see the crowd today? Where's the individual? There's a sort of womb-like comfort in the crowd. You don't have to think for yourself. You can be told what to think, what your profile picture should be. Is it the Ukraine flag yesterday? Get your COVID shot the day before? And tomorrow, what will it be? So I wrote a little pledge of allegiance. If there was one for the mob, it would say, "We pledge allegiance to the flag of the United Nations of Tyranny and to the collective for which it kneels, one world under mob, with servitude and slavery for all." It's fitting, isn't it? So this brings us to Niccolo Machiavelli, and he said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." So fear, from this perspective, is a one-way street. It's one way. I believe he even said that himself, where love is reciprocal. Think about that too for a second. So there's two kinds of ways to respond to a situation. Or I should say two kinds of things that happen when we're confronted with a situation which is either shocking, surprising, or spontaneous. We can do two things. We can respond or we can react. I'm also a volunteer firefighter on 2 fire departments. We don't call ourselves first reactors. Reaction is a one-way street. If you're a reactor, you're going to be fed a narrative, you're going to react to it, or you're going to, let's just say problem, reaction, solution. You've heard that. Have you ever heard problem, response, solution? Why do you think? So the reaction versus the response. Reaction is often done out of fear. In fact, most times is done out of fear. And that's why they got us by the balls. And if kids are in the room, I apologize. So when we start responding to emergency situations, whatever they may be, 9/11 got me, I admit it. But when I found out that it got me, I swore that I would never react to another media propaganda mind control operation as long as I lived. And I've done pretty well. And I know you guys have too. You're learning, we're all learning. This brings us to freedom. Why freedom? How did freedom come to be? Let's blast through these. One of the earliest post-Dark Age philosophers I could find was Pico della Mirandola, and he wrote orations on the dignity of man, that human freedom and dignity are man's birthright. He challenged any and all scholars to debate them in Rome around the year 1487, if I'm correct. And he stated that man was the only creature in existence that can bridge both heaven and earth. Philosophy and dialecticism, which there's 6 definitions of dialectic if you look it up. I don't mean the one that's used in Hegel or the otherwise, but dialecticism basically from this point of view means reasoned argumentation towards syncretism. It's the ability to understand opposites and to synchronize or make them syncretic to where they fuse together and make a more logical truth. So that's the base needed to ascend the mundane. He was a Renaissance humanist. Philosophy caused art to flourish and gave birth to science and eventually freedom. If you believe the materialists, Stephen Hawking says philosophy is dead, or at least he did until he died. Pico's 900 Theses, and this is a very interesting point that I want to stress, marked the first time that a printed book had been banned by the church, and nearly all copies were burned. He was one of the first philosophers ever censored by the Catholic Church in the Renaissance. So he's a particular champion of philosophers to have been banned and censored. So he is responsible for the inspiration that John Locke would come to. And in this quote, John Locke says, "The end of law is not to abolish or restrain, but to preserve and enlarge freedom, for in all the states of created beings capable of laws, where there is no law, there is no freedom." So he saw law as necessary to keep freedom alive. And again, he was inspired directly by Pico. In turn, Locke inspired Thomas Jefferson. So we're tracing freedom through philosophy. And my question would be, and my assertion actually, is that we owe our freedom to philosophy. It's the thinking that produces the product and creates the action. So we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And as I mentioned earlier with the clip from Michael Tsarian talking about the shadow work is really to the discovery of the self, the inculcation of the self into one's life, learning to surf the duality. You could also call this a triality or a trinity. So really the self is the way out. It's an interesting concept. But that master-slave dynamic, which is really what we're still all in today, the answer, the way out, is the self. And that's why we should never leave psychology at the door, or consciousness. The unification of opposites is the oldest ancient secrets of the alchemists. It was Courtenay who said that the alchemist really isn't seeking to transmute lead into gold, but rather unify the opposites within himself. And I'm paraphrasing. He's one of the greatest alchemists that ever lived, and that's the real gold that man should seek. We have the union of opposites of male and female. And what is the thing between male and female that produces the offspring? Love. Anyone? Love is reciprocal. It's two-way. It's a response, not a reaction. So that union of opposites, again, is what is responsible for the continuation of human life on this planet. And why do you think they're telling us and targeting our children, saying, you don't have to be what you are? We'll confuse you, we'll invert it. This scene from Lord of the Rings, when Aragorn was finally able to transcend his fear of death, he was unified within himself and he could command death. That's the message I get from it. You can command life only to the degree that you can command death. And if you have fear of either one, you have control of neither. The key is to be centered and to wield the power and knowledge of both life and death. It's a wave of creation, folks. We can wield it to the degree that we understand it. Carl Jung, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by the integration of the contraries. Another genius mind. So the pursuit of truth, the goal for me is to see truth become the new normal. It's a wonderful thing. I think that's all of our goal in some way, shape, or form. Can we do it? I think we damn well can. And the best way to predict the future is to create it. Why be in the prediction business when we can make it for ourselves? Was freedom not made? Is it not an attitudinal way to look at the world? To have that attitude? What comes first, freedom or liberty? Why freedom? Because liberty is something prisoners get for good behavior. Freedom is an attitude. It provides you with liberty. So what can we do? We can resist the inversion. I love this quote by Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Let's be in the new model building business. Butler Schaefer said, you and I can bring civilization back into order neither by seizing political power nor by attacking it, but by moving away from it, by diverting our focus from marbled temples and legislative halls to the conduct of our daily lives. The order of a creative civilization will emerge in much the same way that order manifests itself through the rest of nature, not from those who fashion themselves leaders of others, but from the interconnectedness of individuals pursuing their respective self-interests. And so this brings us to the theme of this conference, which creative artists uniting for the sovereignty of everyone. And this quote, to send light into the darkness of men's hearts, such is the duty of the artist. And that's what the Renaissance was. That's what inspired the movement for freedom, philosophy. I would be derelict in my duties and remiss if I were not to mention the 7 years at my job at the University of Science and Philosophy, formerly the Walter Russell Foundation. He wrote, you have no limitations until you set them. This man here is the most famous unknown artist in the world. I implore you to look him up. He wrote the book in 1926 called The Universal One. He made 1,000 copies of this book. He sent 700 out to prominent scientists around the world and another 300 to the major universities of the world. And shortly after that, he was notified by the Catholic Church that if he reprinted that book, the Pope would issue a decree against him and his work, and he would never work again anywhere in the world. One man did respond who received this work, and he said this: Nikola Tesla to Walter Russell, lock up this cosmic knowledge in a safe for 1,000 years until man is ready for it. When I read that quote some 12 years ago, I said, wow, the greatest electrical engineer in the world that ever existed says something like this. I got to go check this guy out. And boy, was I happy that I did. So as I said, I was president of the university. I coordinated and facilitated the moving out of 64 tons of art, sculpture, and personal effects from storage in Waynesboro, Virginia, and set up a world-class art museum. I had no experience being a president. I had no experience moving priceless artwork, but we moved basically the equivalent of 11 tractor trailers full of art in 9 days with 7 people and 0 breakage. And in Waynesboro, Virginia, you can visit this link, snap a picture of this slide if you want. Visit philosophy.org to learn more about this genius. On his passing in 1963, Walter Cronkite said of his passing that the Leonardo da Vinci of the 20th century passed away on his birthday, May 19th, 1963, at the age of 92. His university was an extension of the Twilight Club, which was a consortium of poets, philosophers started by Herbert Spencer. Mark Twain was a member, Edwin Markham, who said, "In vain we build the city if we do not first build the man." And multiple others, Walt Whitman, just some of the top thinkers in the world. And it was Herbert Spencer's concern that man, because of industry and the Industrial Revolution, was losing his soul to this thing called industry. He was literally becoming a cog in the wheel of industry, soulless. And so they implored the creation of character building clubs to keep man's character from plummeting into a machine-like mindset. And so character matters to the greatest minds whose shoulders we stand on. And the more we develop our character, the greater people we become, the more we can affect change on this planet. In fact, I would assert that genius is the only thing that has brought true meaningful change. And so that's important that we remember and have the memory of the history of these great minds that came before us. And if we do inculcate our character and work on our characters individually through the understanding of, we are what we desire to be, we create ourselves to the degree that we desire either greatness or mediocrity. And if we do that, we cannot be defeated. Why? Because defeat is something one has to accept. If you do not accept it, you cannot be defeated. And another warrior, defeat is a state of mind. No one is ever defeated until defeat has been accepted as a reality. Now, how do I know we're going to win this? We've got a fight ahead of us, there's no doubt. But how do I know we're going to win this? What did they do to Pico? What did they do to Walter Russell? Censored. Why haven't you heard of Walter Russell? Most people haven't. In my opinion, there's nobody greater. I haven't met a man who could master all the 5 fine arts with only a 4th grade education. Isn't it interesting? We've never heard of him. That's the thing I got more than anything. People would call the university, and 1,000 calls, people said, "Why have I never heard of this guy?" See that? This is the White House, the inauguration of the 46th President of the United States. The date is January 20th. You see the thumbs down there? That's how I know we're going to win this. They took the thumb down off of YouTube because every video was the same thing, a mirror image. I think it got up into the hundreds of thousands of thumbs down, still never over 10,000 for thumbs up. And here's one more way that I know we're going to win this. The bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Fell.
And finally, the children. It's you, the parents, that are going to raise the kids that will have the aptitude, the wherewithal, the knowledge that are going to make the changes. Every succeeding generation going forward is only as good as the parenting that preceded it. So I will say this much. Seeing this video gave me a lot of confidence as to why we're going to win this as well.
I live back in the woods, you see, my woman and the kids and the dogs and me.
That's as country as you get right there. Chickens, a possum on your head while you're eating a biscuit. That's why we're going to win this, folks. Grassroots. We're going to learn the things we need to learn as we go through the trials that we have to go through, but freedom is an ideal, it's an attitude, and it will never die. I want to give a quick shout out to, and all these are .coms. If you had a .com, you take a picture of this. These podcasts will help tie things together from the psychological perspective, and definitely with consciousness added in. Here for the Truth Podcast, Cult of the Medics, David Whitehead, great guy. I've been on his show several times, and of course, Unslaved, great Michael Tsarion. I was honored to be the first guest on that show when it started. And I want to say that in light of that, just remember that you are the new media, folks. The old media, the mainstream, it's dead. It just doesn't know it yet. But it's going to take time for something to kick. You ever seen an animal die? It takes a minute, a few minutes. This thing's a beast. It wasn't made overnight, and it's not going to die overnight, but there's so many great podcasters, so many great things coming out. Never forget the balancing side of the equation. The death half of the wave is what these inversionists worship. There's also the life half of the wave. And love is the force. You got to have love for yourself and love for your family. That's where it starts. Love is balance. Balance is key to winning. The more balanced you are, the more in the zone you are, and the better you're going to perform on the field. So always remember, that dignity of self. Dignity of self, balanced use of one's free will, your vocational interests. You don't need to go to college. I didn't. I became president of a university. I'm self-taught in most things that I've done. Anybody can do what they put their mind to doing. That's something we don't often hear mentioned in this fight we're in. Your reverence for life, your love of God, family, country, they all lead to higher character development from an individual standpoint. This is the path to unfolding the genius within you, which we all have a genius within us. Such a life will be worthy of remembrance. And just remember this, mediocrity is self-inflicted, genius is self-bestowed. Thank you very much for your time.